epidemic without those stories of hope, those stories of transformation that are carried in their hearts and with their actions by those individuals in the recovery community. I was so pleased to meet our next speaker, Courtney Chandler, who can answer those questions, who knows what John Hopkins doesn't. So let me tell you about Courtney Chandler. She's the program coordinator for Global Empower Mentoring. She developed her own social-emotional curriculum and successfully implemented the class in restorative justice practices in 2 local middle schools in Kent, Washington. She has a degree in criminal justice and social work from the University of Washington. She has 8 years of experience working with vulnerable youth and young adults and is a restorative practices facilitator and trainer. And her lived experience, which I'm sure she'll share, includes experiencing early childhood trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault survivor, battled substance abuse, and she's overcome tremendous adversity to now not only be in recovery, but in making recovery the new epidemic and knowing how to connect with young people. So please give it up for Courtney Chandler.
Hello. Hi, everybody. There's a lot of you out here, so bear with me, I'm a little bit nervous, right? I've spoken and done trainings with people before, but today's a little bit different because first of all, I'm super honored to be here and so grateful that the Opioid Task Force reached out to me and asked me if I would come and share my story and connect it to why prevention and education is so important. So I'm going to attempt to do that with you today. I have slides, I have stuff in front of me, but to be honest, most of what's going to happen today is I'm probably going to end up just going off topic and talking about from the heart because that's all I know how to do. I don't know how to be anybody but me, and I spent most of my life trying to be somebody other than me. So today you get me, Courtney Chandler. You're welcome. Okay, so as Connor explained, right, if you look at me on paper, and if you look at my resume looks a whole lot more impressive than that even, right? It looks like I have lived a life full of accomplishments and success, which I have, but I've also lived a life full of pain and suffering as well. And this is the first time in my life that I can say that I'm truly on a pathway towards success, and I haven't been able to say that and truly mean it my entire life, and I'm almost 30 years old. Most of my life I've spent battling substance abuse and addiction, and my addiction took me to places that are only comparable to hell, right? I've done unspeakable, shameful things in order to maintain my daily drug habit to avoid being ill, physically ill. And a couple years ago, the person who's standing in front of you I didn't look like this, right? A couple years ago, I was homeless. I was living in my car with my boyfriend at the time and our dog. And I lost everything that was important to me, including my home, my job, where I worked with kids, because I've always had a big heart and loved kids, and I couldn't maintain that. And I lost the trust of my family, I lost my self-respect, and I lost my soul, really. I lived and used to use drugs, that was it. And I used against my own will every single day, right? I didn't want to use for 7 years, but I didn't know how to stop. And if you were to look at my life growing up, you wouldn't have thought that I was a high-risk person from the outside, right? I grew up in a middle-class family in the north end of Tacoma. My dad and my mom are still together. Loving parents, right? I was afforded every opportunity possible. I played sports. I joined clubs. We always had enough. We always had food on the table. We always had clothes, right? And I had enough love to go around for each of us, my sister included. My dad has worked at Stadium High School for over 30 years as a teacher, an English teacher. My mom is the executive director of teaching and learning in South Kitsap. And my little sister who's here today, She is the program manager of the Mobile Community Intervention Response Team, or MCIRT, with Comprehensive Life Services, and she graduated a few years ago from this school with her nursing degree, right? So, yeah. But by the age of 13, I had full-blown depression. I was suicidal, I was self-harming, and I started self-harming at a really young age because I was trying to escape the pain that I felt inside every single day. On the outside, I looked like a happy child, right? And I was at times, but there was always something off. There was always something that I just didn't understand. I couldn't connect with people in the way that I wanted to. I couldn't stop feeling alone. And it's because I had secrets, right? Like I had secrets that I didn't know how to tell anybody. I never was really given the chance to tell somebody. I was so full of shame that I didn't know what to do. And I had been molested by a babysitter by the time I was a toddler. And so I grew up feeling dirty. I grew up feeling like I didn't deserve anything good and that I was to my core in my being a bad person. And so I only deserved bad things. Despite all the love my family gave me, I still couldn't heal from this trauma that I experienced at the age of 2. And so by the time I was, like I said, by the time I was 13, I was full-blown depression, suicidal. I attempted suicide 3 times. And I started drinking and smoking pot as well. And by the time that I was just trying to fit in, right? I was just trying to fit in. I was still a normal kid. I was still getting decent grades, right? And so in high school, one of the very first, and I'm about to get really vulnerable with you guys, so I apologize if I start. Actually, no, I don't apologize. I don't apologize. I actually hear in my voice because it's real and it's raw and it's honest and it's what's needed right now. When I was 14 years old, at one of my very first high school parties, I was gang raped at the party. The rest of the school found out by people telling this story in their version, and I became the slut of the school. So now I was being bullied and labeled on top of this tremendous trauma, and I have never felt more alone in my entire life. But because I was getting good grades, or decent grades, right? Because my dad worked at my high school and was well respected, because my family didn't look like a family that needed help, I slid under the radar, and even though I was slowly declining and slowly getting more and more into drugs and alcohol, and I entered into a relationship that lasted 3 years of intense emotional, verbal, physical, and sexual abuse on a daily, like nobody noticed at school because I didn't fit the mold of somebody that needed help. Right? And so that's why I'm so grateful that they're doing things like the SBIRT testing. And up in Kent, where I work now, we implemented the SBIRT test to the whole school, in both middle schools that we're in. And we were able to screen all the students at that school. And the results were, other people were shocked. I wasn't. There's so many of people, my story is not unique, you guys. Like, there are so many kids out there that are suffering, that are going under the radar because they don't fit what you think would become a substance, like a substance use, an addict. Sorry, I don't know how to use your guys' terminology. An addict. And so, excuse me. And so, I had goals for my life, right? I had goals and plans, and I always had a heart of gold, and I wanted to help other people. My sister and I had donated money and raised money doing lemonade stands when we were young for kids with cancer, right? Like I always wanted to help people. I just didn't know how to help me. And so by the time I was 16, I found myself pregnant, and I didn't know how to tell my parents. I was full of shame, I was scared, and so I went and I got an abortion. And the doctor there gave me my first prescription of opiates. And mind you, I didn't grow up in a family of addicts. I didn't know what addiction was. And so to me, all I'd heard in school was don't do drugs, they're bad. But when I took that, one, I didn't think it was a drug because it was prescribed for me by a doctor. Let's put that out there, right? I trusted the doctor. I didn't know that I was at risk for addiction because of the trauma that I'd experienced because of whatever reason, right? I'm an addict. I didn't know that. I didn't even know what that was. And when I took it, it took away all the physical, emotional, mental pain that I had ever felt. that it turned off my brain, it shut off all the craziness in my head. It helped me like relate to other people. And that may sound weird for some of you who've never done it before or have never experienced these things, but when you've spent your entire life feeling like an outcast, feeling like an outsider, not knowing how to connect with people, not knowing how to fit in, feeling like you're dirty and disgusting, when something numbs all of that and you can just be, like I fell in love instantly. And it made me normal, right? I by no means thought ever in my life that I was going to become a full-blown heroin addict. I never planned for that. None of us planned for that. When I say us, I mean all addicts. I speak for all addicts. We don't plan to become addicted. Nobody wakes up one morning when they're 5 years old and says, I'm going to be a heroin addict when I grow up. Nobody wants to be addicted to this stuff. When I was 20, so my addiction slowly progressed over time with prescription opioids, and then eventually that ran out, money got tight, and I turned to heroin, and by the time I was 21 years old, I was a full-blown heroin addict. Also at 21 is when I overdosed. I overdosed in my family home a couple of days, I think, after my little sister's graduation from high school. My little sister is the one who came and found me and gave me CPR and called 911 and watched as they tried to revive her sister. And she didn't want to have anything to do with me for years after that because I didn't stop using. And that same little sister is sitting here today in the audience as my biggest supporter. I tried everything. From the time I was 19 years old, when I first understood what addiction was, when somebody at a party who took me home and put a blanket over me and laid me down, and it was the first time a guy hadn't taken advantage of me. I woke up and he said, hey, I'm an alcoholic and I think you might have a problem. You might want to go to treatment. That guy was like my angel. I've never been able to contact him again. But he was the first one to tell me, like, hey, you may have an answer to what's going on with you, right? So I went to treatment at 19 for the first time. I didn't stop using until I was 27. I tried every inpatient, outpatient, detoxes. I even tried medicated assisted treatment a couple times. And it didn't work for me. The only thing that worked for me was this last time I went to treatment, right? But it was different. They talked about trauma. That was the first time they told me that I was a trauma victim. That what had happened to me wasn't normal. That I didn't deserve what had happened to me. That I was allowed to grieve what had happened to me. They helped me understand that the trauma I'd experienced literally physically changed my brain structure. I knew nothing about that before. I could talk about trauma as an abstract concept, right? But I had no idea that all that I'd gone through in my life was traumatic. I also, the traumas that I just explained are only a few, unfortunately, in my life, right? Like, when you live a life of addiction, you also see and do a lot of things that are traumatic, that compounded trauma on top of that. And I also put myself in some really risky situations, and I've also been, I'm a repeated sexual assault victim as well, many times over. And so, by the time I went to treatment this last time, and they told me about trauma, and my counselor there sat me down and she said, look, I would challenge any psychiatrist that every symptom you have is related to early childhood trauma. Because I had been diagnosed everything under the sun, by the way, guys. Like from bipolar to depression, anxiety, PTSD, multiple personality disorder, I don't know, you name it, right? And she was right. Since that moment that I learned about trauma, and I decided that I was going to stay clean no matter what, and I was going to change my life, and I was going to give this thing called recovery a shot, right? And I work a 12-step program as well. I would stand before you like a completely changed person. And I just celebrated 2 years clean on January 17th this year. And out of all my accomplishments in my life, that is the biggest one. And the one that means the most. My regular birthday doesn't even matter anymore, you guys. That's my new birthday. Because that's when I learned how to live. For the first time ever. And in this process, I've learned how to free myself of all of the pain and suffering, and I've learned how to heal. I've been given permission to heal. And healing doesn't look pretty. It's terrifying, right? But with my support system and my tribe of people, man, I have a whole different outlook on what addicts are, just to let you know. They're my people. Some of the most amazing, kind-hearted, empathetic, creative, smart people I've ever met, right? And I'm blessed to have a support group that I have. And so, why I'm standing here in front of you today is not just to tell you my story, right? Like, I tell you that because I want you to know that I want you to understand that trauma is a precursor to addiction, right? I know it's people say weed is the gateway drug, right? And I'm gonna call BS on that.
Right.
Trauma is the gateway drug. Unresolved trauma is the gateway drug. And so at 6 months clean, I was blessed with the most life-changing opportunity I've ever, I could have never imagined, right? I was asked by my current employer, who was not my employer at the time. I was actually going to go share my story with the summer leadership girls group at Glover Empowerment Training. And he asked to meet with me. He asked me to tell him about myself, so I did. And then he asked me if I was capable of creating him a curriculum that utilized restorative practices to teach youth social emotional learning skills. Mind you, I had 6 months clean, right? I had a college education under my belt. 6 months clean, and I said yes, knowing that I was not a doctor, not a psychiatrist, didn't even have an expertise in curriculum writing. Actually, I'd never written a curriculum. And I said yes, though, because I knew I had years and years and years of living and enduring trauma and experience overcoming trauma. And so I poured my heart out onto this paper, right? Poured my heart out, and I wrote down every tool that I've used that has saved my life. And I brought to him a fully developed social emotional learning curriculum that we now use in 2 Kent middle schools, and we teach a full class during the school day to these youth. And this is the 2nd year we've done it. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into when this started, right? And when I look at my curriculum and I look at these 5 categories of what they say social emotional learning requires, right, for it to be a full curriculum, my curriculum has all that in there. And I'm not standing up here to sell you my curriculum. Like, there's a lot of social emotional learning curriculums out there, right? And I think it's absolutely paramount that we start teaching kids these skills at a young age. What I've seen in the last 2 years has been remarkable, right? Like, we've had nothing but positive results from this. And most of it is based around teaching youth how to identify and understand and cope with their emotions. And I can tell you, as an addict, I used over my emotions so many times. I didn't know how to deal with them. No one taught me that this feeling wasn't going to kill me, right? Actually, the first time that I learned that my feelings wouldn't kill me was when I took an anger management class. And these curriculums actually talk a lot about how to handle intense emotions like anger, right? My whole life I covered up every emotion with anger because that's the only thing I knew how to feel, because I literally felt to my being that if I allowed myself to feel any of the pain and the hurt and anything else that I would die. And that may sound crazy, but that's my reality. And as a kid, that was always my reality. And I'm not alone in that. I hear that over and over again, right? And so the results and the data from the first year was unbelievable, right? The youth who participated in our class had significantly decreased behavior incidences, and I personally saw remarkable growth in each and every one of them. One of the other things that I've been blessed to do this year that I'm super excited about is implement what's called restorative justice, right, into schools. Excuse me. Restorative justice and restorative practices. And I'm excited about this because restorative justice is just a relational approach to resolving conflict. It's helping youth and adults maintain and build healthy relationships. It looks at the whole child instead of just the behavior that they're displaying. Because oftentimes, the behaviors that you see that kids equate to bad behaviors, which then they internalize and feel shame towards that they're a bad kid, right, is oftentimes the result of some underlying trauma or some underlying issue that's going on at home or in their life, right? So we're constantly punishing kids for these behaviors that they're displaying at school, but never sitting down and talking to them and asking them what's going on, right? And so one of the things that we got to do with restorative justice this last year, my favorite story, is we have a youth, I'm not gonna say his last name, but his name's Carlos, right? And so Carlos got suspended for having weed in his backpack. And while he was suspended, he had the option of coming to our office to do some restorative justice work and some restorative work around what had happened, just simply having conversations with him. And through those conversations, we found out that he was smoking weed because his grandma had passed away and he didn't know how to deal with it. And when he smoked weed, he didn't have to think about it. Sound familiar? That's what I was just explaining, right? So we talked about that, and instead of focusing on the behavior, the smoking weed, we gave him the opportunity to write a letter to his grandma. And he went out to the graveyard with one of our coworkers and let that go on a balloon, and then made a plan that he was going to take a drug and alcohol class at school, and he was going to make a commitment to not smoke for 2 months. He's now on his 6th month, and he's doing so much better in school, and he's all pumped about it, and he used to be all about weed. He doesn't even talk about it anymore. Like, that's powerful, right? And all we did, was give him a platform and a tool to grieve. I don't know about you, but I never learned in school how to grieve. I didn't know or learn how to breathe, how to pause, right? So some of the tools that I think are super important, and when I reflect back on my own life and I think about what interventions worked, right? Like I said, the anger management, mindfulness and breathing, which are also incorporated in a lot of social emotional curriculums, right? I had a counselor who taught me how to find my safe place in my own head. And literally for the first time in my entire life, I was able to stop myself and find relief from the constant panic attacks I was having from PTSD. We teach that to kids now in the curriculum. It's super simple, but it's powerful. Kids shouldn't have to go to counseling in order to figure that out, because not everybody gets to go to counseling. Processing grief in healthy ways, right? I myself, two of the most absolutely healing and most powerful, healing processes that I've done is I wrote a letter to all of my abusers It was like 24 pages. I thought I had nothing to say. Counselor said, no, keep writing. She took it outside with me and let me burn it. She said, now you get to let this go. I wrote a letter also to my ex-boyfriend who committed suicide. This is Tristan, right? That was also like 20 pages. I got to let that go in a balloon. The balloon didn't really go up, it was too heavy. So I got to let the balloon go up, right? And again, it was just a physical act and representation of letting go, right? I was able to grieve. I was given tools that work. But I was given tools at 27 years old. Like how much pain and suffering could have been lessened had I learned these lessons earlier in life, right? And I'm gonna tell you the same thing I tell my students. Life's not fair. It will never be fair. This is not about teaching kids that life is fair. This is about teaching them how to be their own superhero and how to get out of the adversities that life throws them, how to overcome all the traumas they experience, because we can't stop trauma from happening. But we can equip kids with tools and resources and get them connected to resources early, right? The other parts that have helped me are positive affirmations. I didn't know I could retrain my brain. I had no idea. I thought that the way I thought was the way I thought, the way I felt was the way I felt, and that was it. I didn't know that all this negative self-talk, I could tell it to shut up, and I could tell myself good things. And it seems so simple, right? Like how, it wouldn't even take that long if teachers just focused a little bit, okay, what's something negative you feel about yourself? All right, let's change that, right? Let's talk about something positive and we're gonna practice that every day. Imagine what that would do. Like think about all the negative things you say to yourself. Because I know I'm not the only one, right? Anyway, these are all tools that are used in social emotional curriculums, right? And the things that were missing in my life that I wish that I had a platform I wish I had a platform to talk about trauma. That's first and foremost. I think we go through life and we pretend like it doesn't happen, but there are more kids experiencing trauma than ever before. Give our babies a place to talk about it and quit pretending it's not happening. We talk about the opioid crisis as being an epidemic, which it absolutely is. And I'm super grateful that there's been all of this focus on treatment, right? And getting, because that's where my friends have gone through treatment, right? Those of us who needed it have had access to it, and that's awesome. But that's only half of the issue, right? So far, most of the efforts have been reactionary and focused on those already addicted. If we continue this way, we'll never see the end of the epidemic, ever. Prevention is equally, if not more important, when we talk about finding an end to the opioid crisis. And prevention starts young. It starts as early as kindergarten, preschool, right? Because for every parent that is currently in active addiction, there's a child or children being left behind. Sexual assault victims are more empowered than ever to come forward, which means we can no longer avoid it, we can no longer pretend it's a secret and ignore it. And the amount of young children, boys and girls who are who are experiencing abuse of all kinds, including sexual abuse, is absolutely sickening. Violence in our society is on the rise, right? But what we what we fail to focus on, I feel like as a society, as a whole, are the kids or the people that are witnessing and left behind to like pick up these pieces of their lives after violence occurs, right? Like the news may focus for a moment on like how hard it might be for a little boy to watch his dad get taken off to prison, or for a little girl to watch her mom get gunned down in the street, but then they're forgotten about by the majority. I'm not talking about all, right? And then they're expected to return to school, do their homework, get good grades, pay attention in class, sit still, right? And very few are given the time to breathe. And many are not even taught healthy ways to cope with the things that have just completely destroyed their life. And if we continue on this path without implementing serious intervention strategies and prevention strategies, like, we're gonna end up just continuing the cycle, right? We have adults who grow up without proper coping skills, without knowing how to deal with the abandonment, the trauma, the fear, like all of that stuff that they've been experiencing their whole life. They don't know what to do with it. And then we grow up and we're more likely to turn to substances. Not everybody, but most. Because it becomes the only coping skill we have. So, how much time do I have left? Okay. So we know that early childhood trauma affects children's brain development, behavior, and health for the rest of their lives. Children continue to grow into adults who lack the skills to cope with the trauma and abandonment that they've experienced. Okay, I already said all this, sorry. This is what I said, I don't really need the notes, right? Sorry, okay. I guess really all that I have left to say is that, like, if we continue to ignore the necessity of teaching youth actual social and emotional life skills at every age, at every age, right? It can't just be in kindergarten, one class, that's it. These are life skills that kids, like, yes, we have one class in a middle school that we're teaching right now, right? But that's just planting a seed. And for some, it goes right over their head. What gets them the most is the relationship, right? The healthy adult relationship is so important. That's the difference between tolerable and toxic stress, is whether they have a healthy adult relationship. And it doesn't have to be a parent, because not everybody has the same access to parents. It can be a teacher, it can be a counselor, it can be the janitor. Anybody that a child connects with, it's important. It could be a first responder, right? And that's why I'm a proponent for restorative justice and restorative practices. But anyway, if we continue to ignore that, the necessity of teaching youth actual social and emotional life skills at every age to help them overcome the adversities that life throws at them, then we as a community are at fault for contributing to the continuation of this epidemic. Because we know that youth who grow up with unresolved childhood trauma are far more likely to abuse substances and live lives full of addiction and hardship and crime. And we have at our disposal evidence-based practices that have been proven to help pave a positive path in one's life. So, you tell me, why would we not want to teach the next generation the tools that will help them succeed in life?